Okay, good. Thank you. By the way, wasn't that a fantastic presentation of what Bell Labs is doing? Every single piece of technology that I intend to use, buy, or be a customer of in some way, right? So you guys need to hurry up, right? That's my basic message. I suspect, John, is what you would like as well. It's funny that when you return to a place after 3 decades, you immediately say, oh, it's changed so much. But then you realize it is you who have changed so much more. So I'm here with a sort of a sense of humility for what this organization and the people who helped me in my career have done. And I'm also obviously here to honor Dennis for his extraordinary accomplishments, which we've heard this morning. In my case, I came here in the summer of 1976, believe it or not, at the ripe age of 21. And I worked for these extraordinarily old geniuses. I've since done the math, and they were 31, 32, 33, but they seemed so smart and so advanced. And Mike Lesk took me under his wing, and the two of us wrote a product called Lex, which it's extraordinarily disturbing to people at Google today to find themselves using Lex. And they talk to me about it all the time, and they file bug reports just to harass me. And I was obviously had the privilege of working with Al Aho and Jeff Ullman very closely, who have remained sort of mentors and friends. And Ken's contributions, of course, extraordinary. And of course, from here, I went to Berkeley, where I worked for Dave Patterson. So when I say that these are the people who got me on a path of success, I want to thank you all and Bell Labs, not just for my education and my work and the income, but for the platform that you created, which created Sun, which then funded my kids' college education. And then let's see, the foundation for Google, which then created the necessary environment for my grandson to be a happy Android customer, and on and on and on. So when you think about the impact that you can have, think of it as the impact that you have on a person over their entire life. And I'm so very, very grateful for that. What I wanted to do is I wanted to talk a little bit, I think we've talked a lot about the technological components of what's been done here. And I want to sort of just agree with all of that. And if anything, you should have said it even stronger. That's how important this is. What I really want to talk about is the impact on society of these things. And let me observe, there's a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt: "Men are not prisoners of fate, but only prisoners of their own minds. They have within themselves the power to become free at any moment." And I would argue that this is the point we are at today in society, that we have to think about this and act on this. And I observe, by the way, as best I can tell, we're in the networks business here, right? You guys are, I'm in, and so forth. Networks are changing the world. There's increasing returns to education. That's a network, by the way. There's increasing returns to global brands. That's an example of Google and Apple and others like that. There's an increasing concentration of economic power in elites, which is, by the way, in my view, not very good. That's also a network effect. We had the worst global financial crisis in 60 years. That was also essentially a networking effect and a governance effect. So networks matter a lot in ways that people in this audience understand at a technical level. And our society would do better understanding in terms of the impact, because they're going to keep happening. And there's serious and long-term problems in the world today. I was trying to think about what's sort of an interesting list. There's a lack of global demand for goods, right? That's the sort of recession, global recession issues. There's this issue of long-term youth unemployment. There's a shift from manufacturing to services with a lower sort of set of income and so forth, or issues around marginal employment. There's a lack of efficiency in government or protected jobs, whereas business efficiency continues to be very strong. There's a problem of democracy, where because of targeting, individuals are more likely to vote in their own self-interest rather than in their community interest. We understand this very well. There's the loss of traditional role of media, right? Because of all of these new voices, not necessarily bad, but there's nevertheless a loss. And one of the things people are beginning to understand is that political systems can actually fail. They can actually be turned over by something else. So this is not just some game that we're playing. This is the real life. These are the impacts of how society meets the networked world that we're beginning. So I look at this and I said, well, what can we do, right? What can we all do about it? Well, first we can talk about it. That's what I'm trying to do. But I'm one of these people who believes that technology is a tool to solve problems, and that the people here in the audience are problem solvers, right? So it's fine to state the problem, but why don't we solve it? And let's solve it in a new or interesting way. And sort of reimagining the future with technological progress, with innovative ideas, such as the one we've seen this morning, and the references to the historical component, which just shows a pattern over and over again. The technology came along, and clever, smart people, a preponderance of them here in New Jersey, shocking, managed to actually have a nonlinear global scale impact because of it. And obviously, as a computer scientist, I believe computer scientists look at these problems in a particularly interesting way. So what are some of the interesting sort of technological solutions that we have ahead of us? Well, David and others have led a revolution in education. Finally, after decades and decades of intransigence, the educational system, which is its own institution and its own incumbency, is being changed by innovative educational tools that will, in fact, allow people to learn in the way that they most efficiently learn. This is true at the collegiate level, where David is one of the 5 or 6 people who founded this sort of movement, and there are now many, many companies that are trying to do this. It's also true at the K through 12 level. I'm now on the board of something called the Khan Academy, which is one which I'm particularly proud of, but there are many, which are basically taking short educational snippets and making them available over global networks. Now you sit there and you say, oh, this is really nice and good and so forth. Imagine a really smart kid in Africa with no textbooks and a modest internet connection, and imagine the gift that these gentlemen have given that person. Is there any more important gift than a gift of education? Very, very hard to think about it. That's how excited I am about what we can do there. Universal language translation. We want to know another gift? The ability to understand what's being said. And the fact of the matter is that algorithmic improvements in statistical machine translation allow us to translate 100 by 100 languages as spoken. To me, I always thought that this was a sort of a marketecture. Somebody had sort of invented this, a demo that would never scale. But we now have examples where people speak into a phone, and it comes out the other language on the other side. How does that work for the non-technical people in the room? The voice goes into the phone. The voice is put into a text form. It's sent to a computer in a cloud somewhere else. It's then statistically translated into another set of text in the other language, and then a voice synthesizer sends it to the phone, and it comes out the other end. What magic that is. And yet it shows up in our lives, and we say, oh, okay. I knew that. I was expecting that. Well, I wasn't. Okay. I have a long list. I'll keep going. Can you imagine if we used the technology that we have today, RFIDs and so forth, to do a global financial asset tracking system where we could actually stop corruption for good? What's the number one issue in the developing world? Bad governments and corruption. The people actually are pretty good. People generally are pretty good-hearted, they're pretty intelligent, and they want the right things. It's their governments that suck. Okay? How do you want to fix that? You fix it with technology. And you can now. You couldn't before. Establish a principle that innovation is how change occurs. Most jobs are created in small businesses. Come up with systems which enable that. Google is one of the companies that tries to do that. Let's establish a culture of fact. Okay, I know this is shocking and very controversial. If someone says something, check and see if it's true. Don't believe everything you hear, including what I say. Check it out. Use your favorite search engine. Use our competitor. Do something. to make sure you're not being misled. Okay? It's the rights and responsibilities of being a global citizen. Because everybody has an angle, but you have your own view and you need to express it. We can do things that we couldn't do before. We can actually, for example, we can track food shipments. Food shipped to some village and people need it. SMS me back that you got it. I want to see if it got there. Easy. Think of the impact in terms of real issues. In countries where we don't even know the population, we don't have UIDs, we don't have driver's licenses and so forth, there are people, for example, in India who are trying to come up with a universal ID, which is tied to the development of government services for a traditionally corrupt and inefficient bureaucracy to become more so. In each of these cases, a relatively simple technological idea at scale changes lives, but more importantly, literally delivers life. It prevents the real terrors of life. And there are plenty of other examples which you can use this for terrorism and so forth. In fact, when I made a list, I thought, what can technology help solve? Well, the education problem, the corruption problem, the illicit network problem, the terrible tyrant problem. We have that around the world too. With the small business growth problem, we have the language problem, we have the energy problems, which are being solved in other technological ways, and the bad government problem. That's kind of like most of the problems you hear about if you read the paper. So get to work. Seriously. Seriously. Because that's why we do what we do. So what does the technology future look like? Now, I'm extremely worried about Doug McElroy being in the room. So keeping in mind that predictions are a great way to look foolish, and I predict that the future will come sooner and be stranger than what we think. And I think that that's in fact, because of the multiplicative nature of networks, the combinatoric nature of choices, and you all can do the math, I think it's hard to know, but I'm quite sure it will be even more bizarre than we think. And people think we're pretty bizarre. Okay? That's what I really think. But I think that we start with this dream that this far-off future, which is going to happen in a few years, where everybody's connected, everybody lives longer, and the poor are lifted up and given a new voice, and we can hear them and help them and so forth. This is achievable in our lifetimes, globally. That is what is so astounding about the historical narrative we've heard today, that we're not at the end of something. And I don't think our speakers said that either. But we're not at the end of something, but we're rather at the beginning of something much, much larger. So I was sort of making my list, and you'll write these down. Living spaces. No alarm clocks. Coffee made, windows open to let into the sunshine, a light back massage, not a loud budge to nudge you awake. The systems around you when you are sleeping and wake up understand who you are and what you're up to. Mattress sensors, following sleeping rhythms. You think that this is crazy? You can buy pieces of this today in the commercial market. Skim through the day's news on transparent screens, right? And because this stuff is geolocated and they know the stuff you care about, it's tailored to you, to the stuff that you actually want to, because there's infinite information. And of course, holograms, right, to give you sort of the excitement and the feeling of really being there. Of course, driving is much more pleasurable when the car drives yourself. And you think that's crazy. Well, the car's driven me and it didn't kill me, although there's a really big red panic button right there. Because we've not quite fully debugged driverless cars, but we're working on it. And by the way, thank you for the legacy of C. It's quite reliable. So my point here is, wouldn't the world be safer if the car drove yourself? Think of 30,000 people terribly killed in car accidents in America today. Not even a news story these days. Let's figure out a way to prevent that. We can do that now. Essentially streamlining your life, making tasks easy, understanding all the sort of crap that you have to do every day to get through life. done automatically for you. Voice recognition, instant transcription of emails, no more texting and driving, not that you're supposed to be driving anyway. And even social robots that can recognize gestures, and you can send them to represent you. You think that this is crazy? It's all in labs, some of it here, someplace else, all which we'll see in our lifetimes. Now, that's partly because we're in the developed world. We're in the rich part of the world. The story for people who are in undeveloped worlds or non-developed worlds is even more profound. 650 million people, mobile users in Africa, 2 billion in Asia. As these guys come online with essentially powerful smartphones and reasonably fast networks, these transform lives. I mean, whether it's the story which many of you have already heard, the village fishermen and women who can keep fish on the line and wait for calls to avoid spoilage, for them it's a life crisis when that revenue doesn't come in. When formerly isolated people connect to the world, and they can become Justin Bieber fans too, it's always exciting. Discovered on YouTube, I might add. The ability for the media to check the government's claims, to keep governments not corrupt. Maybe we discover that the best graphic designers in Africa are in Botswana because of a unique aspect of their art or their culture or so forth. We don't know yet, but we're going to know this quite soon. New opportunities for collaboration, new ways for parents to educate their children. Each of these, as we take these things for granted, they are more than life-changing for each of the people for whom connectivity and this kind of expression comes to end. So you say, oh, okay, well, I sort of internalized all that. Okay, well, what about health? Everybody here cares about their health, the health of their family, the health of their mother and father, and so forth and so on. The biggest problems in our society right now are probably obesity, diabetes. Look at the costs, look at the expectations. So when you take a microscopic robot and you take it into your bloodstream, which you will sometime in your lifetime, to measure all of this and to dynamically Wi-Fi out what's going on so that you can get immediate treatment and immediate change, then you'll finally say technology has been useful for you. You'll finally admit that this stuff is really helpful. We already have, for example, ingestible health technology. There's a pill approved by the FDA that collects information about a patient's response to a specific drug and sends it out. That's not going to be the biggest part of the initial part of the medical thing. It's going to be devices that are essentially monitoring or one form or another. There's a very large number of firms that are now doing essentially iPhone and Android phone plug-in devices, which transdermally, that is without pricking you, can measure what's going on inside your body. And the goal here is to change the doctor-patient relationship in a completely surprising way to the doctor. We're going to make them call you, right? The phone's going to say, hey, there's something wrong with Eric, and the doctor's going to call me and say, you better come in quick. And I, of course, will say, like, for what? And they say, just show up and don't be so obnoxious. My point here is that this notion of real-time monitoring of your health is just at the beginning of it. And I'm not even talking about the context that big data, big computation is doing for health. It's now possible to build these databases of genetic information, right, as the genetic sequencers get all the information that comes along, and build databases not just of what you have, but also drug treatments. For example, in the last few years, there's been a discovery about junk DNA, and that the junk DNA, which was thought to be not very useful, turns out to actually talk about how proteins and so forth are expressed in the various systems that run our bodies. The important point here is that in each of these cases, you need a massive computing center of information, a massive database, massive data analytics and predictive analytics, and a few scripting languages and some programming tools to make all that happen. And then you need the miniaturization and the monitoring that has been made available by the extraordinary miniaturization of the world around us. Now, you think all of that's happening? You think 1 trillion lines of code is a small number? Think when you think about when you have 1 trillion microprocessors or whatever follows that structure. that's making this web, this mesh happen. So when I think about that, and I think about the technology, the governance, the health, the innovation, I think what happens after that. And I want to make some claims here that are a little bit riskier. I think it starts with some observations about demographics, that the aging of the Western world and the demographics of smaller families mean that for the most advanced countries like the United States or Europe and so forth, or Japan, the only path for rapid improvement in productivity is rapid improvement in productivity. That the only way the economics will grow, that people will be better off, is if we can figure out a way to use these tools to make people even more productive in the classic ways that economists measure them. So for the things that tie us together, of which we're the same, DNA, health, the human spirit, we're going to know much more about the global experience as this happens. We literally will know everything. We'll know what's happening in other countries. We'll worry about them in ways. We are bound so tightly. This unparalleled explosion of simultaneous science means that the rate of discoveries increases. It is traditional to assume that the rate of discovery has slowed down, that nothing interesting is about to happen. This is always wrong, right? That's a prediction I'll make for you. That there's always more, and the reason is because there's even more smart people now, even more connected, even more stuff happening. It's easy to understand in that context. And global science, which we care all about passionately here, knows no restrictions, and we're all locked into the same physics. It is the same physics for us as it is for everywhere else in the world. And globalization means one other thing. It means thousands of local experiments. And because of these tools and the culture that I'm describing, each of these sets of local experiments can be marked. They can be studied. They can be ranked and rated. And we can get the best practices. Did you know that people outside the United States may actually approach something in a better way than we do, and we might actually learn from them? What a shock, right? That in fact, whole knowledge industries that would benefit from globalization, from this sort of this diaspora of knowledge, this diversity of new ideas. It's really extraordinary. It gives you a headache to start thinking about all the things you should be learning and understanding. And in the case where the problem in society is a lack of awareness or a lack of education, we can solve those problems. With awareness, we have awareness. With education, we can fix that through the good work of all the people that I've talked about. If the problem is healthcare or security or bad government, those are going to take longer. We should be optimistic, but those are harder. And I think that what happens here is that the sum of rising expectations, and here's where I worry, this is not just a Pollyanna message. The sum of rising expectations mean people will be mad. Did you think that all those people driving by the dictator in Syria's mansion were just happy to drive by the mansion? No, they said, I don't like this and I want my own mansion. Right? And ultimately leading into what is essentially a civil war. And so it's possible for some of these systems to be overcome by a tsunami of expectations. In computer science, we call this a forced upgrade. Right? That these systems may actually be attacked in ways that I think are unpredictable. Human systems, human solutions are messy. They don't follow a perfect order. I don't think you can actually predict exactly what will happen. But what I can tell you is that that the effect of globalization and this integration is something we should spend a lot of time thinking about, because it is going to happen. And we need to figure out how we want to deal with it. But the interesting thing is if you map this out far enough, I make the following claim. It's sort of my final claim. Eventually, technology just disappears. It literally just disappears. The Arthur C. Clarke quote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I've given you examples of this already. And you want to sit there and think, is this magic? Or does it have a technical basis? If you can't tell the difference, you've caught it. But I'd argue that the way I would modify this is any sufficiently widespread technology ceases to be magic. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that. I was expecting that. When it's everywhere, it no longer surprises. And people will forget to say, well, how did they do that? How did we live before we had Google Maps? How did we live before we had cell phones? How did we live before we had television? How did we live before we had radio? Somehow people got through life. It's shocking. It really is. But what I would argue is in the future, people will spend much less time taking technology, trying to get technology to work, worrying about which cables go with which computers or where your content is stored, and it will all be seamless. It will just be there. They'll be busy worrying about other things, which I won't predict, because they'll be worrying about something. In that sense, the web, as we know it today, will be everything and it will be nothing. It'll be like electricity, which was the magic of 100 years ago, which we take for granted today until there's a power outage. If I were to say it as sort of a final point, the achievements that we talked about today have a natural arc. They are extraordinary in the reach. They helped me, they helped all of us, they helped my family, they helped all my friends, they helped everyone globally. We're talking about what Dennis did at a scale it's incomprehensibly important. But it has an arc. And the most interesting thing about the arc is that at the end it becomes nothing because it becomes everything. That's what's so interesting about this. As it becomes that pervasive, it disappears. And it's not by going away, it's by going everywhere. What I'd like to say is that this was always, I hope that this is what the people founded Bell Labs in 1925 or so. I would hope that the people who founded this place understood that this was possible. So thank you all. Thank you very much for hosting this, and thank you all.